Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us, Team Mosso at the1916company.com for purchase, pricing, and availability questions concerning this watch. Today, we're discussing a model that launched at Basel World 2013, and for a lot of folks, this is the Blancpain 50 Fathoms to own. It is the titanium bathyscaphe. It has a gray nickel anthracite dial that contrasts with the black of the steel, and of course, the watch right here in grade 23 titanium. We'll talk about that in a moment. Much lighter than its steel or rose gold equivalent. So, it is 43 millimeters in diameter, 13.4 millimeters thick from lug tip to lug tip, 49.4 millimeters, with a 23 millimeter spacing between the lugs, which means you can use straps from the standard 50-15. We'll throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference, and the fit is standard bathyscaphe, well, at least if we're not talking ceramic. The ceramic cases are a little bit bigger, but this is a standard 43 bathyscaphe. Now, you can see it is thinner than the 50-15. That is a thicker watch. This is slimmer despite having the same tech specs and movement. I'd recommend it for a wrist as small as 15 centimeters circumference. Mine is 16, and I don't think I'm overwhelmed by any means. The lightness really helps. It'll easily slide under a jacket cuff and possibly even some dress sleeves because it is, again, just 13.4 millimeters thick. Taking a look at the strap, it is a Blancpain Classic sailcloth on the top. This is a textile that is almost completely indestructible. It's stitched, it's bolstered, and on the bottom, it's lined with natural rubber, which extends the life of the strap by protecting it from the moisture, heat, sweat, and grit of the wrist, but it also feels better against the wrist because this aggressive textile is not aggressing against you. No crimping, no gouging, brand new Blancpain factory strap. Okay, the buckle, you can see, useful amount of faceting on the pin itself, which surprises me because the attention to detail is excellent. And then on the bottom, it says grade 23 titanium. So what is that? People ask, is it grade 5? Is it grade 2? And the best answer is it's more like grade 5. So grade 5 is what's known as 6-4 titanium. So it's titanium that's 6% aluminum and 4% vanadium. This is as hard as grade 5. So it is 6% aluminum, but it is 2.5% vanadium, and it actually has palladium added to it. So it's got the scratch resistance at grade 5, but it's also got more corrosion resistance, and it is even less bioreactive, which is why when implants are made, it's generally with grade 23 titanium for complete, inert, non-reactive, decades-long existence inside a human body. So this is grade 23, basically grade 5, but even more resistant to corrosion. Okay. In terms of shape, very simple. The bathyscaphe has always been designed to be more vintage or retro-inspired than the standard 50-15. We've got a big crown. We've got no crown guards. We have very minimally beveled lugs that are squared off on their ends and a narrow case band with no Blancpain branding on the flank like you'll find on a 50-15. So it's thinner, it's simpler, but it's mechanically the same, which means you've got a screw-down crown, a 5-day power reserve, caliber 13-15, and 300-meter water resistance. You've also got a 120-click bezel. Let's hear it. It is definitely more mechanical than what you find on a 50-15. That's very refined. This is a lot chattier. This has a nice chunkiness to it, which I actually prefer. A good bezel can make a dive watch, just as a bad one can sort of break the experience. This is a great one, and again, it is 120 click. You can see it has a ceramic brushed insert for scratch resistance, and there is a luminescent pearl, so you can line up that pearl with the hybrid baton syringe minute hand. Now you've got a 60-minute count-up timer, which I prefer to chronographs because I find it's easier to read the minute scale of a dive bezel. It's also cheaper downstream to maintain a dive bezel than to pay for a service on a chronograph. So it's kind of a win-win. Now, taking a quick look in the dark, the watch has no shortage of luminescence, and critically, the seconds hand is also loomed. So if you are using a mechanical watch as a backup dive timer, and it should always be a backup these days, you're going to know whether your watch is running even in the dark. You don't want this to stop, especially not if you're going to rely on it. Now, the dial as a vertical curtain of nickel anthracite. So anthracite is somewhere between gray and black. Anthracite is a metallic type of coal, and it was known for burning very clean on locomotives. So when you would see anthracite advertised, that's what they were talking about on old rail lines. So in order to make sure everything matches up, the indices in the hands have all been blackened. They're polished for contrast, but they are blackened, so they better blend with the dial. Now, of course, these are button style appliques with the exception of the quarters. Then we have a little faceted 430 date. I like the 430 date. I prefer to have all of my indices intact on something that's designed for legibility, especially in the dark. I know some people have strong feelings about that, but this is actually the way I like it. Now, in terms of functions, you've got the hacking seconds function. You can see the instantaneous jumping date change at midnight. And then we've also got a quick set system for the dates. You can rapidly cycle that if you need to. And let's take a look here. You can see they got this fundamentally right. The font on the bezel is the same as the font on the date disc. Well done, Blancpain. Okay, so I can also tell you that the watch has an outstanding feel when the crown is withdrawn. This is something worth mentioning. There's absolutely no wobble here. A lot of crowns, even on pretty robust and butch-looking sports watches, you pull them out and they start to wobble like a top. This feels really strong. This feels like hardware. This feels like something you would expect on a premium dive watch. Now, taking a look at the case back, of course, we've got the 1315, which in many steel versions of the old 5015, you wouldn't actually get to see. Now, today, the anti-magnetic qualities are bestowed upon it by a silicone hairspring, so you can see the case back. You don't need a soft iron cage here. So we've got a lovely blackened gold rotor that features satination as well as beveling, as well as media blast. So it's a triple finished rotor, 3 mainspring barrels, a minimum of 120 hours of power reserve, and it's got a nice flat curve. So unless you're right down to the last 12 hours of power reserve, or you've wound the thing to the absolute limit, it's going to have a nice flat curve for those 5 days. So you don't need to worry about it racing forward when fully wound and then losing a ton of time when you get to like the last 48, 36, 24 hours. So it's really very stable because of those barrels. You can get a huge power reserve with 1 barrel. Using 3 barrels here, the design, of course, is to create a more stable timekeeper, not just a long power reserve. Now you can see 6 position adjustment, 1 more than a standard chronometer. So that's a feather in its cap. 35 pivot jewels, and it's a fairly large movement. As you can see, it has no problem filling up this sizable watch's case back. It is free sprung for durability against shock, as well as more precise setting. And what free sprung means is that this little index only holds the stud. It doesn't move. We have these little screws on the balance rim that move in and out in pairs to change the timing by altering the polar moment or the turning force. So that's what that does. In fact, when I push the crown back in, you could see the little hacking lever moves out of the way. Now, being free sprung, it's durable, it can be precisely set, it has that anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, and it beats at 4 hertz, so no games are played to get that 120-hour power reserve. Sometimes you see watches with lower beat rates to ratchet up the power reserve. This has a slightly small balance, but it has a high beat rate, which is what you want to see on a modern sports watch. Now, my understanding of these bevels has evolved over time. I will say this, they are mirrored, they are a mile wide, they are perfectly polished and gorgeous. And if I didn't know that some sort of mechanical process were behind this, I could be fooled. And once upon a time, I was sort of taken aback by just how perfect and mirrored they are. I mean, they look as good as Romain Gaultier. They look as good as the Laurent Ferrier. But where you can really see that this is done by a mechanical process is really any corner where 2 bevels converge, where you find that it's very, very rounded and that the bevel sort of rolls up over the top of the bridge, indicating a mechanical process. Now, I don't know for sure that this wasn't finished off with a handheld drill bit with a buffing tool, but I know that this is not, for example, done the same way Romain Gaultier does bevels. But the level of aesthetics achieved here is outstanding, and I have no idea why the expensive dive watch from Blancpain neighbor Audemars Piguet still has bite marks on the edge of its bevels. This is the way to do it on a series-built movement. You can also see there's this lovely sort of spiral snailing across the bridges. It looks more at home here than traditional Côte de Genève. And then we also have solarization of wheels in the winding system as well as the ratchet wheel, polished screw heads that look fantastic. We have beveled screw and jewel sinks that look great. This is a beautiful movement, not only technically adept in every way, but also aesthetically pleasing and equal to the image of this watch. Now, whether you believe the 50 Fathoms launched as the first dive watch in 1953, or whether it was merely one of the very first in the mid-50s, there is no denying its legacy is decades long. It is the heart and the soul of this brand. It is one of the original dive watches. If you're going to buy a Blancpain, you're going to get a 50 Fathoms if you want the iconic watch. And if you're going to get a 50 Fathoms, sometimes for ergonomics, this is the way to go. Get the Bathyscaphe. Reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for pricing.